And for that girl backstage, never mind who you thought I was, I'm Rick James.
James Ambrose Johnson Jr., aka Rick James, born February 1st, 1948, died August 6, 2004. In music history, there's artists who live comfortably within the sound of their era, and then there's artists like Rick James, loud, brash, defiant, and impossible to ignore. James didn't just make funk music, he reinvented it, injecting a punk-like energy that challenged the polished grooves of the late 70s. He crowned himself the King of Punk Funk, a title that spoke just as much to attitude as it did to sound. By the early 80s, with anthems like Super Freak and Give It To Me Baby, he wasn't simply another name on Motown's roster. He was its engine, dragging the label into a new decade at a time when many of its stars had faded. His 1981 masterpiece, Street Songs, featuring the immortal duet Fire and Desire with Tina Marie, proved that funk could be both raw and mainstream. But for every stroke of brilliance Rick James put into his music, there was an equally destructive impulse pulling him backward. Known for outrageous stage shows, flamboyant outfits, and a lifestyle that epitomized excess, James became as famous for indulgence as he was for innovation. Cocaine binges, lavish spending, and reckless decisions shaped his public image just as much as his sound, making him both a cultural icon and a cautionary figure at the same time. What makes his story sting is how much talent he truly had. James wasn't just a performer, he was a songwriter, producer, arranger, and band leader with few peers. Beyond his own success, he launched or revived the careers of others, penning classics for protégés like Tina Marie and the Mary Jane Girls. His air for talent was undeniable, but consistency was never his strength. His career spiked with Street Songs, then began to slowly unravel under the weight of addiction, ego, and clashes with an industry already shifting toward new sounds. When the late 80s ushered in New Jack Swing and hip-hop, James, once a pioneer, suddenly seemed outdated. Younger acts borrowed his blueprint but left him behind, while his life spiraled into arrests, lawsuits, and prison terms that permanently scarred his image. By the 90s, his legacy was less about music and more about scandal. Rick James should have stood alongside music's greatest innovators. Instead, his name often sparks equal parts admiration, laughter, and disbelief. What happened? Let's talk about it. Salute to Buddy Boy, age 64 on IG for this request. It's your boy JC, Stunted Growth Music. Got it. Take a minute to like, subscribe, and comment on who I should do next. Rick James was a singer, songwriter, and producer from Buffalo, New York. Before becoming Motown's most unlikely savior, his path to stardom was anything but direct. Born James Ambrose Johnson Jr., he escaped a turbulent childhood by joining bands as a teenager, then fled to Canada in the mid-60s to avoid the draft. There, he crossed paths with future legends like Neil Young and Johnny Mitchell, while experimenting with rock before returning to the US and chasing a recording career. By the late 1970s, James found his true lane with funk. Signing to Motown, he released Come Get It in 1978, powered by the hit You and I, which announced his arrival. He followed with multiple gold and platinum projects, but his breakthrough came in 1981 with Street Songs. Mixing gritty funk with mainstream hooks, the album made him a superstar and set the stage for both his dominance and decline. Stunt number 1, Addiction to Excess. For Rick James, the same energy that fueled his creativity also fueled his downfall. At his peak in the early 1980s, James embodied excess more than any other figure in funk. The persona he sold on stage, flashy outfits, explicit lyrics, unapologetic bravado, wasn't just an act. Off stage, he lived that image to the fullest, and it came at a heavy cost. Cocaine became the centerpiece of his lifestyle. By his own admission, James spent millions on the drugs over the years, often bragging about using it before writing, recording, or performing. While it initially heightened his wild energy and relentless pace, it quickly became a crutch that drained his focus and discipline. Studio sessions that once produced tight, groundbreaking records turned into chaotic all-nighters, fueled more by partying than precision. Friends and collaborators recalled how working with James meant navigating unpredictable mood swings, long waits, and an atmosphere where drugs took priority over music. Excess wasn't limited to narcotics. James's spending habits matched his appetite for indulgence. Mansions, cars, clothes, and entourages grew larger as his bank account swelled. But with success came paranoia, ego, and conflicts inside Motown. The same label he helped rescue in 1981 became another target of his frustrations when he felt underappreciated. His defiance was genuine, but behind it, a man spiraling deeper into addiction. As cocaine use escalated, so did its consequences. His health began to slip, his reliability in the industry waned, and his reputation shifted from genius to liability. By the mid-1980s, instead of being seen as the future of funk, James was often viewed as unstable, a star who could burn out at any moment. What should have been a decade of dominance became a decade of distraction, with drugs quietly sabotaging a career built on brilliance. Stunt number 2, legal troubles and prison. If addiction slowly chipped away at Rick James's career, legal troubles swung the hammer that shattered it. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, James's name became less associated with music and more with headlines that highlighted his erratic and dangerous behavior. His clashes with the law weren't minor dust-ups, but severe incidents that permanently damaged his reputation and placed his freedom at risk. The most infamous came in 1991 when James and his girlfriend were accused of holding a woman hostage and subjecting her to abuse during a cocaine binge. While out on bail for that charge, he was arrested again for a similar crime involving another woman. These back-to-back incidents painted a grim picture of a star whose excesses had crossed into criminality. By 1994, James was convicted of assault and kidnapping, receiving a prison sentence of more than 2 years. For an artist once at the center of funk's evolution, it was a devastating fall at a time his career needed him most. Prison stripped James of both time and momentum. The music industry was unforgiving, and while he sat behind bars, the sound he helped shape moved on without him. Younger artists and genres borrowed his influence but left him forgotten. For fans, his incarceration confirmed suspicions that Rick James was no longer the icon they once admired, but a man consumed by his demons. Even after his release in '96, the damage was irreversible. Though he attempted a comeback with performances and collaborations, his credibility was permanently scarred. The legal troubles weren't isolated incidents, they became the centerpiece of his later legacy, overshadowing the innovation and creativity that had once made him a pioneer. Instead of being remembered solely for breaking musical boundaries, Rick James became a cautionary symbol of how self-destruction can derail greatness. Stunt number 3, industry shift and being overshadowed. Even without addiction and legal trouble, Rick James faced another obstacle that few artists can escape: the shifting tides of music. By the mid to late 80s, funk's dominance was fading. A new generation of sounds, new jack swing, hip-hop, and increasingly R&B-driven pop began to capture the mainstream. For an artist whose music had once set trends, James suddenly found himself struggling to keep up with the world he helped create, quickly leaving him behind in favor of artists with more consistency. Younger acts borrowed heavily from his blueprint, producers sampled his grooves, artists adopted his flamboyant attitude, and his unapologetic edge lived on in hip-hop culture. Yet, instead of being celebrated in real time, James was pushed aside. Where he had once been Motown's cutting edge, now the label itself was shifting resources to newer acts that could better connect with the MTV generation. James, with his reputation for unpredictability and excess, didn't fit the clean, marketable image labels wanted. Albums after Street Songs never reached the same level of acclaim or sales. Records like Cold Blooded in 1983 and The Flag in '86 contained flashes of his genius, but failed to keep him relevant as the cultural center of music moved. By the time hip-hop exploded in the late 80s, James's greatest contributions were being recycled as samples rather than chart-topping singles of his own. This transition hurt more than sales. For Rick James, whose ego thrived on being larger than life, watching imitators and successors find mainstream acceptance while he slipped into the background was devastating. What should have been a second act of reinvention became a silent fade out. By the 90s, his legacy lived more in the music of others than in anything new he produced, leaving him overshadowed by a wave of artists who built careers on the foundation he had laid. All in all, Rick James's story is a tale of a man who had everything needed to be a legend, but whose demons kept pulling him down. His music proved funk could be raw, rebellious, and mainstream at the same time, giving Motown new life when it desperately needed it. Street songs alone earned him a seat among music's innovators, and his influence still echoes through samples, covers, and artists who borrowed his style, yet his downfall was just as loud as his rise. Addiction, reckless choices, and time in prison kept him from fulfilling the legacy his talents promise. Still, his music continues to resonate decades later. For all the controversy surrounding his name, Rick James left behind work that ensures he'll never be forgotten. A reminder of brilliance, influence, and the high cost of losing control. Remember the spark, but remember the warning too. Greatness needs discipline, vision, and care to last. Hopefully that truth can guide young artists chasing success without losing themselves each day. Salute, much respect, but for these reasons, his growth was stunted. It's your boy JC, Stunted Growth Music, and I'm out.